10 bouquins. 10 bouquins. 10 bouquins.
I remember, spoken in Kinyarwanda, the local language, by Emmanuel Macron. Did the French president find the right words in his speech at Kigali's genocide memorial? Macron acknowledging France's damning responsibility, as he put it, in the buildup and to the 1994 genocide, an era when France backed a regime where hardliners were determined. Paris should have seen the peace process unraveling, said Macron in a much-anticipated speech by a French president, hoping this marks a new beginning after 27 fraught years. Was Macron right to stop short of an explicit apology and to follow the conclusions of historians that found no evidence that France actively participated in the genocide itself? That's been a line often taken by then rebel leader Paul Kagame, who's ruled Rwanda ever since. This time, he seems satisfied, saying the truth matters more than an apology. What's at stake for Paris? What's at stake for Kigali? In particular, what does it mean for the generation that's born after 1994? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if it was as far as France could go in recognizing its role. Joining us from Brussels, she covered the 1994 genocide. Colette Breckman, international desk reporter for Belgian daily newspaper Le Soir. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
With us as well, Serge Niambo, member of the Rwandan community in France. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And Jacques Maire, deputy chair of the French National Assembly's Foreign Affairs Committee, member of parliament from Emmanuel Macron's La République En Marche party.
Very pleased to meet here.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Emmanuel Macron spoke of a debt towards the victims and the gift that can only come from survivors, that is forgiveness. He added this, quote, "This journey of recognition offers us the hope of emerging from the night."
En me tenant
Standing here today
avec humilité et
with
respect
humility and
à vos
respect
côtés.
by your side, I have come to acknowledge our
Nos
responsibilities.
responsabilités. Seuls
Only those
ceux qui
who
ont
endured the
traversé
night
la nuit
can, perhaps,
peuvent
forgive.
pardonner.
Bestow upon us that
Nous
gift
faire
of forgiveness.
le don, alors, de nous pardonner.
Serge Niambo, is that the right choice of words?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much for having me. And I'm so happy also to talk to Colette Breckman, who has been really resourceful a journalist working on this issue since years. The process of acknowledgement is also a sense of acceptance. And words were perfectly chosen. Mr. Macron, your president, our president, he is a master of discourse. And I like this Shakespearean way of putting it, like a walk in the night.
Shakespearean.
Yep.
The use of the word night.
Yeah, a walk in the night, just it's in Hamlet. I beg to be corrected, but it's like Act 3. And I even read a book by a South African author called Alex Laguma, who called the system he was living in South Africa, a walk in the night. So it's so strong, this choice of words, because for the time being, we need to be reasonable. Rwanda's population is in majority young people who were born quite after 94. So for the time being, of course, we are so passionate and angry about any French involvement. But for the time being, politics put apart, I think we need to start thinking about how to talk to each other. There's a population I'm part of, like the community of Rwandese people in France. We are dual citizens. We want to be good citizens of France and good performing citizens of Rwanda. And if the two countries don't talk, both ends have something to lose. So it's so positive. and I really appreciate.
There was a false start 11 years ago. Nicolas Sarkozy going to Kigali, saying mistakes had been made. We thought that was the road to improvement of relations, and then it all went south again. So what's different this time?
Time has passed, and we need to understand that the war French presidents are hitting on when they touch the issue of Rwanda. It's kind of right-wing and far-right wingers who are unapologetic by culture, by history, which is the French pride. That war has weakened since Sarkozy, and Sarkozy had a lot to lose in pronouncing words like today about acceptance and hugging Rwandese people. You know, they are also the body language. You could see Mr. Sarkozy was not that closer to people, to the crowd, but today Macron has not only had that voice and that chosen tone to get his words with empathy that you can perceive in his speech, but also the gestures of going to those ladies and hugging them. That's a mark of sincerity in the Rwandese culture.
So
the hug is important.
The hug is important. Colette Breckman, in these times of COVID, it's true that we all were struck at the end of his speech when the French president went and hugged those women who were in the front row during the speech. The last time you were on the show, you described to us how your native Belgium issued a full and formal apology for its failings during the 1994 genocide. Listening to Macron, does it sound like it is the step forward that Serge describes, or could he have gone further?
Well, I think the two persons have a different character. The Belgian Prime Minister, it was spontaneous. He suddenly took the decision to go and to ask for apology in the name of his people and of his government. President Macron is more cold. He is now also in the perspective of elections, and I think that he rationalized more, and so he went as far as possible. He made his own calculation of how far he could go, and he did it. But he did not. It was not a real spontaneous movement, except at the end, as you said, when he was hugging, and then he also showed some very sincere emotion when he left the site of the memorial. But also the fact is that he asked for forgiveness. It was a question of forgiveness, but this forgiveness, in my view, it was given for free because he did not recognize the depths of the French involvement, of the involvement of the state. It was not the fact of some individuals, of just an individual case. It was the state, it was the Republic who was involved supporting the extremists in Rwanda. And this, for him, it was too difficult to recognize that. No, so he went as far as possible, but not further on.
Colette, that panel of historians, which was allowed to delve into archives recently, in fact, there were two panels of historians, one here in France and the other in Rwanda. They concluded that there were political responsibilities, heavy ones, but that there was no active involvement in the genocide itself on the part of the French. You're saying that's not the case?
Well, President Macron said the killers did not have the look and the face of France. No, but they had at least some of their weapons. So that is the reality. But it did not go as far as recognizing that. And also the historians, they were working on written sources, on documents, on paper. But there is a long, another view, another side of the story, which was the vocal aspect of the genocide. Things were orders were given by voice but not written, and this of course is very difficult to take the evidence of this. So historians have been working on the accessible sources, not all of them, because for instance the commission, the Kiles commission, was been working on the genocide in the late 90s. Those archives have not been given to the historians, so the source were there but not all of them.
Jacques Merle, so there's more work to be done, Colette Brickman says. You agree with her?
I think, first of all, we have to, I would say, to size the importance of the day. And at this very moment, I think of the survivors. I think of the victims. I have a thought for the victims of this genocide. You know, it was 27 years ago, and it was a burden for all the people of my generation. And today, I wouldn't say I'm relieved. I say it is a very big progress. It's historical. And I think in 10 years, we will see this moment as a landmark for the story, including for the story between France and Africa. In 1994...
Between more than just France and Rwanda.
Of course, yes. Because, and this is not the only move that Mr. Macron did. There was some moves also related to Sankara assassination, for example, and so on and so forth.
In Burkina Faso, yeah.
Yes. And these days, today, it's just, I would say, the formal moment of a process. And the process is based off the share of evidences. You know, I read the report. I read 900 pages of the report. I never saw such a picture, such an in-depth picture of the way the government is managed, the way the diplomacy, the military is managed. It is very precise, it's exhaustive. I even found some of my notes because I was diplomatic advisor of the Prime Minister at this moment, and I made some controndus for the meetings, and I saw them extensively. So, I mean, it is everything. Of course, everything which is available, but I never saw that before on something which is so vivid. And my feeling is that, of course, it's not the end in terms of investigation, but for the French part, it's only the French part of the investigation. Mr. Macron couldn't do more. And I understand...
So the Duclerc report commission made an important distinction. It said that ultimately the responsibility was not that of the French military, but there was a political responsibility. And the Duclerc commission points the blame squarely at the then French president, François Mitterrand. We didn't hear his name in that speech this Thursday from Emmanuel Macron. We didn't hear him talk about François Mitterrand.
Yes. And it's true that, you know, French is a kind of, French institutions, they are a vertical organization. So when the president is going one way and his environment trying to implement his policies, then it has consequences on many levels. And what was, for example, very interesting for me is that the normal level of internal debate within the government at this moment was not fully respected. It was a bit more fully respected during the cohabitation between Balladur and Mitterrand.
Yeah, there was that power sharing because the right had parliament, but Mitterrand was a socialist.
Yes, and the right has a government, and Mitterrand was a president. But I don't think we can go much further on the French side. Even when I hear Mrs. Brackman talking about the report from the Assembly, my guess, I can't swear, but my guess is that 90% of what you find in the Assembly report will be found in the Duclerc report.
On Colette's blog, you'll find there's a lot of gray areas that she points to.
I think what we could expect a bit more is to understand how did it happen on the ground based on local records. Because on the French part, for me, it's exhaustive. And my feeling is that, so that's what, there is a kind of candor and sincerity in the demarche of Mr. Macron. It's true, it's very hard to recognize such thing because it divides also, I would say, the society. But now we are 27 years after. I think it's right time to go forward and to look at the future.
The Rwandan president, Paul Kagame, wholly approved the words of Emmanuel Macron this Thursday. Let's listen to him.
His words were something more valuable than an apology. They were the truth. Despite some loud noises and voices, President Macron took this step. Politically and morally, this was an act of tremendous courage.
Now, Serge Niambo, Paul Kagame saying the truth is more important than an apology there. Is that smart politics or is that the truth?
This is true, but also smart. I want to point out that to give credit to President Kagame because of the last visit he made in France. For me, you can analyze it in any sense you want, but this was a diplomatic stunt of huge proportions. Meeting those generals retired from the French army, some of them he's been meeting in the past. One of them, he was corresponding with him when he was in the south of Rwanda in Turquoise Operation.
Yeah, so, on the battlefield.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So these are like comrades in arms who were opposed someday in history, and 7 years later they meet and they talk. Okay, let's leave matters of generals between generals. But coming back to us, like population, we need, please, always to think about how time heals. Time can heal. I understand that. One last thing about Colette Breckman. Colette Breckman wrote a huge piece of work in 1995, called The Autopsy of the Genocide. I was working for the UN Human Rights Field Operations in Rwanda, the Geneva UN Human Rights Commission. The mandate was to work on mass graves, investigate, and made an evaluation of all the horrors that happened. That book was in the hand of any UN volunteer and any UN official who came to investigate. And until today, seeing that there's a big report, Duclair, coming out now, with historians, with scientists. If you take like Colette Breckman book, 26 years ago, plus books like Gabriel Perriès, Une Guerre Noire, who is a huge academic in France, and you add all of that, they have been almost silenced when they were published. So the momentum here about the report,
they've been vindicated, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
We're going to pick up on that when we come back. We'll take a very quick break. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're speaking on the day when there was this much-awaited and sometimes emotional speech by France's President Emmanuel Macron, acknowledging France's role during the genocide of 1994. It comes after a long build-up that included panels of historians preparing long reports, both in Paris and in Kigali. With us from Brussels, she covered the 1994 genocide. Colette Breckman, international desk reporter at Belgian broadsheet Le Soir. Serge Niambo, member of the Rwandan community in France, is with us here in the studio, as is Jacques Maire, deputy chair of the French National Assembly's Foreign Affairs Committee. And joining us from Kigali, France 24's Mark Perlman, who's been following that visit. Mark, let's listen to what was the highlights of that speech. This is Emmanuel Macron highlighting the failings of the French Republic while the genocide was unfolding, and also before, when it failed to see the warning signs.
France did not understand that while trying to safeguard against a regional conflict or a civil war, it was still standing by a genocidal regime. By ignoring the warnings of the most lucid observers, France then bore a damning responsibility in a spiral that led to the worst, even though it was precisely what it was trying to avoid.
Mark Roman, that precise reading of history, do the Rwandans agree with that?
Well, if you listened to the reaction from Rwanda's president, Paul Kagame, they definitely agreed with it. They embraced the words of Emmanuel Macron. Paul Kagame saying they're better, more valuable than an apology, because, yes, there was a lot of talk, lots of rumors about a formal apology by France, like happened with the US, with the UN, and with Belgium in previous years. This didn't happen. However, the fact that the French president asked for forgiveness was very well received by some who said, well, if you ask for forgiveness, you're essentially forming an apology. And so, yes, this was well received, especially the fact that the words chosen in this short but very solemn speech were seen as words that showed an understanding of what happened during that time for the victims, for the survivors, and there was the tone was important also for people here in Rwanda. And so on that point, clearly the French president succeeded. Obviously, this didn't happen in a vacuum. This was a very well prepared sequence between the French president, Paul Kagame, the Rwandan president. There was really a willingness by both sides to make this normalization fulsome reconciliation. And yes, there are still steps to be taken, but French ambassador will be here very soon. And there was a willingness essentially to turn the page and to talk about vaccines, to talk about contracts, like two normal states talk, and not only rehash this very controversial past.
Not rehash the past, but they did make it, of course, the signature moment, Mark. What about 2021? I know there was a press conference. Did they ask, for instance, about the arrest of the Hotel Rwanda hero, Paul Rusesabagina?
There was no question asked about that. I'm actually speaking from the Hotel Mille Collines. This is the hotel Paul Rusesabagina was managing at the time when he was hailed for saving many lives. He's now turned into an enemy here in Rwanda. He was tricked into coming back to the country, and now he's facing terrorism charges, among others. And so there was no question asked. There were very few questions asked at that press conference, two for the Rwandan media, two for the French media. So let's say it was not really a press conference or a Soviet-style press conference, if you will, but the issue of human rights did not come up in his remarks. Paul Kagame essentially said, you know, that when it comes to Africa, the standards are not the same, and this is true for the question of human rights. And so this was a way for him to preempt any question about that, but there was no room, no time for questions. This was, as I said, a choreographed event because there was a willingness by both sides to avoid any miscues, because there have been many, many in the past.
All right, how much you talk about the past, how much you talk about the present. Colette Breckman, if I go over some of the other events that were on the agenda this Thursday during this presidential visit, what was it? There was the visiting of an engineering school, Rwanda Polytechnic, a vaccination center, the grand opening of a Francophone cultural center. What does that tell you?
Well, the Francophone Center was a symbol of the French presence in Rwanda, and it was destroyed a few years ago for so-called urbanistic reasons, because it was an old building, and then it was closed. And many Rwandese were sad about that, because they liked the French culture. They were very open to all the information that was given in the French center. So it's a very good gesture to open this center again. and this will please a big number of Rwandese. And I think this really, both Kagame and Macron, they are looking forward, looking into the future, and they don't want to spend too much time digging in the past, because they want to build a new, better relationship, which is important for both countries, but also for the relationship of France and the rest of Africa, and especially the French-speaking Africa. So it's a very important moment for the relationship of France with all Africa, and not only Rwanda.
Yeah, Jacques, this trip to Africa, very different from previous ones, right? Because the only two countries being visited are Rwanda, as we've mentioned, which, despite the human rights issues, and we can talk about them again, that have come up there, touts itself as this forward-thinking, tech-savvy startup nation in the heart of Africa. And then Emmanuel Macron going to English-speaking South Africa for this trip. Is part of it, again, because it's always about politics, there is a presidential election next year, is part of it to show constituents back home that France isn't just the France-Afrique, the former colonies?
First, I don't see the relations with the French presidency, because I don't think there are many French who vote on the basis of, I would say, the debate with Rwanda. I'm not sure, but I don't feel it's very, very material, even if African topics are very important.
What about people like Serge, who are from the diaspora? There are millions of them.
Sure, there are some. But
millions of Africans who vote, who are dual nationals or French citizens.
Yes, but I remember when Emmanuel Macron, I would say, supported the candidature of Louise Mushikiwabo as Secretary General of the International Organization of Francophonia. There were a lot of people against this candidature, even coming from, I would say, Les Républicains or socialists, as an example, because they considered that Rwanda is a lost case for Francophonie. And because of the fact that it was a form of acknowledgement of past responsibility that we want to come over.
And that was one of the things that annoyed François Mitterrand. He sees that first interview with Paul Kagame on French television in 1994, and Kagame, who grew up most of his young life in Uganda, is speaking English, not French, even though it's a former Belgian colony.
Yes, and it's still the case now, generally. But what I wanted to say that it's of course, there is an important, I would say, dimension of the vision of President Macron vis-à-vis Africa, that there is no one Africa. There are different Africas, and all of them deserve, I would say, commitment, engagement, because issues are global. And when you talk about the fact that is it singular to see him going to these places, I warn you that he made his I would say his cooperation in Nigeria, and he went back to Nigeria a few years ago.
He did his civil servants.
Yes, and that was very important. So I think even in French-speaking Africa, there is a willingness to revisit also the relations, and to, the famous Ouagadougou speech saying that we are partners and we have to put everything on an equal footing. That is something which was said by him, but this was something which was requested by the young population and also by Paul Kagame at many instances. I remember something which was striking for me. When we had Sahel meetings, and when Paul Kagame was there, one of the first African countries to finance directly G5 forces and to be engaged in the fight against terrorism, he put the responsibilities on the shoulders of his fellow colleagues, I would say presidents of the state, saying, okay, guys, you are submitted, right, so to interferences by French armies, but this is your responsibility because you didn't take your own at a certain moment. And it means that things are moving on both sides, and I think this move is in a very positive direction.
You mentioned that resistance among some of the mainstream political parties here in France to Louise Mushikiwabo becoming the head, backed by France, by Emmanuel Macron, of the group of French-speaking nations, the Francophonie. Would you say that there still is a Francophone versus Anglophone rivalry within the high halls of power in France?
I think yes. It's part of a legacy And it's true, it's not only political, it's cultural. When we see the fact that it's a basic, English language is pushed forward by the mondialism, globalism, and French-speaking nations are just, I would say, they have to cope with that. And it's cool that we want to protect French-speaking, I would say, habits and culture. And it's a fight. But at the end of the day, the choice made based on, I would say, the way we want to have reaction with Africa means that we do not make any more differences in the way we tackle issues. Just one single example last week. We had a summit about the financing of Africa. Look at who were there and who took the most important responsibilities in the debate. It was Ghana, it was Nigeria, it was South Africa, it was Sudan, which was very much there, it was Rwanda. There were also French-speaking countries which were there, and they played a big role. But look at the big names which are, I would say, committed to the financial issues. I mean, all the leaders were there. And so it was not the classical French-African summit. It was something much more operational and related not to the willingness of France, but to the needs of African countries.
Serge Niambo, you can't erase the past. You think back to just a couple of weeks ago when you had Emmanuel Macron attending the funeral of Idriss Déby, the leader of Chad who'd been assassinated killed on the battlefield.
Sadly.
The attitudes, have they changed a lot in France? Because we're heading into an electoral season again. And there'll be those criticizing Emmanuel Macron for making the speech he made this Thursday, saying, you shouldn't repent, you shouldn't forgive, you shouldn't ask forgiveness. In the build-up to the presidential election, he's been courting votes from the right. Will this do him any damage?
First of all, I would tell Mr. Mayor that I voted for his party, so that we keep being friends here. Let me talk about that issue without going into politics. There's a friend of mine we talked to today, and he told me something coldly true. He told me that politics killed us in Rwanda. Now politics come back to bury our bodies indefinitely, which means you can see a positive side of what's unfolding now, or the darker side, because in Africa, some people have turned completely against France forever. Why do I say that? Macron is trying not to get sucked into France-Afrique, old school. Now, will he succeed? I think yes, because first of all, he is in the momentum of the new era, new generations. It's a very young continent. And we have so many geostrategic dynamics, both ends, north, east, west, south, and east, center to east in Africa, that it's like a turmoil and no ground now for like a system like France-Afrique can hang on, because everyone will have and talk to different counterparts than before. So for the time being, I wish him good luck, and I think he's going really in a positive sense.
Mark Perlman, again, with an eye towards the presidential election that's going to be taking place in this country in a little under 1 year's time, where do you situate the importance, the calculus in this visit to Rwanda?
Well, I'm just going to tell it bluntly, if I may. Basically, Emmanuel Macron in Africa is tackling two issues linked to the past. One is Rwanda, obviously, and he did this today. The second one, and it's a much bigger piece when it comes to French politics, is Algeria. And he made the choice that he would take an important step, a historic step, let's name it, in Rwanda, but politically it doesn't cost him much, because yes, there might be some unhappy people, unhappy campers, maybe in the military, the faithful to the former president François Mitterrand. But all in all, people are now thinking about vaccines, about their summer holidays, and about police, and the day-to-day stuff in France, not about Rwanda. It would be a much different story if it was about Algeria, because there you have a lot of dual nationals, people who cast votes. This is a very, very sensitive issue, and we're heading towards a very important commemoration in March 2022, 2 months before the presidential election, the end of the war in Algeria, the agreements in Evian, as they're known, back in 1962. And so this will be in a very important moment, and I can bet that Emmanuel Macron is going to be much, much more careful. He's certainly not going to present a formal apology to Algeria, because it could cost him dearly politically. So Rwanda is an important step, but politically, it's not going to have a much echo in France. It has a lot of echo here in Rwanda for very obvious and tragic reasons. But when it comes to France, people will think about other things in the next few days. That's my opinion, at least.
Colette Breckman, you agree that Algeria is an even bigger elephant in the room for the French?
Of course, because the time of France having been in Algeria really mixed with Algeria, it's very long. In Rwanda, France has been really involved in Rwanda 4 years. That is nothing. Whether in Algeria, it's 100 years. It's very different. And also the sentimental aspect of Algeria, many Algerians living in France, the mixture of the people, it is much more important and much more risky for President Macron. I agree totally with that.
Jacques Maire is a French president who, has tried to shore up his right. He's got this law and order interior minister who says a lot of right-wing stuff sometimes. Yes. This trip to Rwanda, does that go against the grain of how he's been tacking in terms of his politics of late, Emmanuel Macron?
I think I would say so you are talking more about migration and the place of Africa in the French society, maybe. Paris is probably the African capital of Europe, and I think French know that and are proud of that. And it's a two-sided approach. I mean, I think Macron valorizes very much, for example, diasporas, which were not at all in the loop before. Wants to build new relationships between the new generations, passport talent, in order to welcome much easier, I would say, students coming from Africa. And he has this kind of positive stake. When you look about his last article in Zadig, there was comparison between Arrondissement 93, northern border.
The working class northern suburbs of Paris.
Yes, which he describes as the new Silicon Valley, in fact, because there are new startups and many innovations there. So that's one thing. And it's true that for, I would say, a direct consequence of that, when you look at the composition of my group in the Assembly, you have more than ever people coming from Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. You've got probably 40 people. And that's changed completely the way this majority looks at Africa and the way they discuss about Africa, because they are part of it. On the other side, you've got Darmanin, I would say, Regalian or authoritarian speeches. I think there could be a contradiction, of course. When Darmanin fights, I would say, with Le Pen with the same weapons, I think I would say it damages the work which is being done with Africa, of course.
All right, so there is a big tent, you're saying, within your movement.
I would say.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Unfortunately, much more to talk about on this issue. Jacques Maire, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Serge Niambo, Colette Breckman in Brussels, Mark Perlman covering that presidential visit for us in Kigali. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.